This is Ed Robinson. Today we'll be talking about worksheets, the Worksheets worksheet object and the Worksheets collection. We've previously described how we can have the worksheet of Excel has a corresponding code sheet behind the worksheet. We could consider looking at these as worksheet objects for our coding purposes. As you know, you could change the name of a sheet. If I were to double click on sheet 3 and change that. Now this is quite cool. If you look at sheet 3 at the moment up here, once I press enter it changes before your very eyes, which is rather nice. This sheet 3 is actually what we call a code name, and Ed's is actually the name. We'll come to the difference later, but not many people realize that a worksheet object does have two names. We'll consider some properties and methods of the worksheet object. In particular, we've got the name property and the delete method. Now this active sheet returns a worksheet. Well, it represents a worksheet object, shall we say. An object, you know, is something which has properties and methods. So if you have a full stop, then you can follow it with a property, or you can follow it with a method. A property is something which it has, and a method is something which you do to it. So if I run this code, you can see that it gives me the name of the active sheet, which is this one down here. Even though the code is actually written in sheet 1, the active sheet is Ed's and gives that name. Next it's going to ask, do I want to delete that sheet? Well, no I don't, so I'll just make sure I don't delete that sheet. If it had code behind it, which it doesn't at the moment, the code's in sheet 1, then it would delete all the code as well. But I'll just cancel that and make sure I don't delete it. Well, it's making me a little bit nervous, so I think I'll just comment it out for the moment. It's useful to take a look at other properties and methods. What we would like to be able to do is to double click on that and press F1 and bring up some help, or even press the full stop after him here and bring up IntelliSense, but it just doesn't seem to work, unfortunately. Never mind. Let's go through the help system, and if I type in here, I'll type in worksheets and worksheet, I think, and see what comes up. Okay, it's the worksheet object member, and there you go, look at that, all the properties and methods of the worksheet object. There's a difference between worksheet object and worksheets collection, which I'll come to in a moment, but you can take a look at those. They can be very useful. It's a good idea to take a look, persevere. Some of them won't be very helpful. In fact, for example, the name property down here, if I tried it, it returns a string that represents the name of the object. Well, that's fine. But a lot of them have actually got examples as well, code examples. For example, I think the rows can be quite useful. You see, look at those examples. You can simply copy and paste that into your code itself and try it. I recommend that you do that, although we will be discussing the rows property as well shortly. I'll just close that help. What I want to talk about now is what we call a collection. Now, a collection is a very useful concept in VBA, but not only VBA, in lots of other programming languages. A collection is a group of objects which got the same properties and methods. So a collection is actually a container. In our case, the container is the worksheets collection, which contains individual worksheet objects. So let's see how that works. Well, very conveniently, you can see down here sheet 1, sheet 2, and the next one. They constitute a collection of worksheet objects. So the worksheets collection contains all those. Like a worksheets collection is like a suitcase filled up with these objects. So in this particular case, you see we have the name of each one, but we're iterating through all of the worksheet objects one at a time. And these are, a little confusingly, these are members of the worksheet collection, the individual worksheet collection, the individual objects of the worksheets collection, which indeed is a worksheet. So let's see how that works. So if you can see that it just iterates through them one at a time. We've referred to the worksheet using an index 1, 2, 3 at the bottom, and be careful, because the index is actually the order of the sheets. Well, that's what I'll actually do. So let me just change the order of this. If I move this sheet here, if I can find it. Well, I'll just move this one across. Now, if I now iterate through them, then this edge has now got the index of 2. So when I message box through them, they'll be in that particular order, but keep in mind that EDS has got index 2. As well as referring to a worksheet by its index, so in this case we've got EDS, which is worksheet 3. We could refer to it by its name, which I think sometimes is called a tag as well. So, for example, we could use the select method to select that particular worksheet. Let's see if that works, and selects the third worksheet. Yes, indeed, that's fine. Let's take a look at our collection again. We're iterating through the collection from 1 to 3, and we're taking each individual element of the worksheets collection, and each individual element is a worksheet object, and we message box out its name, which we saw before. Let's take a closer look at this worksheets collection. For example, we have what we call a worksheets count. Let's take a look at that. If I worksheets, and then fortunately now when I press the full stop, I do get the properties and methods of the worksheets collection, but you'll be surprised that there are not many of them. They're very sparse indeed. Not like the worksheet object, which has loads of properties and methods. So, for example, I'm going to be concerned with the count property, which is this one here. But I noticed another one there, which is the worksheets add. Perhaps I'll just return to that. So let me just make a detour here and talk about the worksheets, in particular the worksheets. I'll type the full stop again. You see it brings up the properties and methods, the worksheets add. So if I were to run that, now take a look down here, sheet 1, sheet 2, and adds. Just take a look. As I run it, watch what happens. It puts another sheet at the very start of the previous one. So it adds to the worksheets collection. I'll just delete that sheet. So this adds to the collection, and you can delete from the collection, and also you can have a remove, I think, as well. A bit confused about that. Sometimes it's delete, sometimes it's remove. Anyway, that's another method of the worksheets collection. Well, returning to this, what we're going to do is iterate through, and I just want to make sure that still works. Indeed, it does. It iterates through. So you see, the worksheets count is pretty clever. It can tell how many elements there are. Just like we can dim an integer, we can actually dim a variable to be a worksheet object as well, just like this. That allows us actually to use a very useful construction called the for each. which we use to iterate through our worksheets collection, like this. I'll just comment this out so you can just keep an eye on the difference between the two of them, and I'll just comment out my integer as well, because the way that we use it now instead of worksheets I is I'll just comment that out and you can keep an eye on the difference. But if I now use my worksheet object, and instead of next I, we're going to have next WKS, next worksheet. Let's see if that works for a start. There we go. It's iterating through them one at a time. So now you've had a good look at that. I'll just delete this now. I mean, you can just see the difference. We're using for each in the worksheets collection. And the worksheet object, we're message boxing out the name. The worksheet collection, I think we came across this, well, we will come across it. If you have a set of elements on a range, then these elements, they constitute a collection of cells where you can iterate through the cells as well. We'll come to that later. Instead of the name, we could message box the index. And try that. And as you can see there, 1, 2, and 3. So the order is strictly from left to right, 1, 2, 3. So if you put eds over here, then eds would have the index of 2. You could try that. Just move them around. The index is the same, but the names, of course, correspond to the bottom left as they are. As I mentioned, if you change the order of the collection, then the collection sort of takes care of itself. And if you remove an element, remove a spreadsheet from the collection, then if you remove sheet 1 down here, then that would mean that sheet 2 would have the index of 1. So it renumbers. So it's very, very clever. But actually, sometimes it can be a bit too clever, because if you try and remove or delete the individual worksheets, you might think, okay, it's going to delete this, and delete this. But what happens is that as soon as you delete sheet 1, it renumbers itself. So it actually goes and deletes not sheet 2, it'll go and delete sheet eds, because you can try it yourself if you dare to delete your workbook, but as it stands, it will only delete every other sheet. There is a way around it. I wonder if you can see what it is. You can, well, with a bit of trickery, you could delete them in reverse order, and that would get rid of them one by one. We have other properties, for example, of the collection, that is, item 1. If we try that, you'll find that it just message box out sheet 1, but that really is today's bit of useless information, because if I just get rid of that there carefully and make it worksheets 1, it gives me the exact same result. So items 1, quite frankly, is the items property is quite frankly a waste of time. I've come across the cells property, but in this case, we're just using the word cells alone. You'll see that it selects all of the cells. If we want to just select the first cell, we've come across cells, but it just shows you that it is it's actually a property which returns a range object which is associated with the worksheets. Let's just try that for a moment. It selects the first cell. We can try the columns property as it applies to the worksheets object. Worksheets. Well, when I say object, this is worksheets 1 is an object. It's a worksheet object, object 1 of the worksheets collection. But what happens here is it just selects the second column. Then we can do the same thing and investigate the rows property, and you'll find that that just selects the second row. We could try where the columns count. That just returns the number of columns of an Excel spreadsheet, which is over 16,000. Here it's implicit that we have the worksheets object in front of that. The active sheet, if you like, you could put that in. It won't make any difference, but you don't always have to specify it, obviously. If we try the rows count, this is quite interesting actually. If you take a look at how many rows in an Excel spreadsheet, you've got over 1 million rows. We could try this column width, and that'll set all my column widths to 5. What I might do is to message box out the value before I change it, and that would enable me to set it back again hopefully later on. So I'll try running this, and it tells me it's 8.3, I think it's 8.3 characters in width each column. But watch what happens now. That just changes all the column widths, and now I could set it back to 8.3 to revert to normal.